Welcome to the Higher Power Podcast, presented by Higher Power Sports PT, the show dedicated to helping active individuals like you unlock your full potential through expert insights on injury prevention, performance enhancement, and recovery. Kurt Kessler is a board-certified specialist in sports physical therapy and an athletic trainer. In each episode, he and his guests bring you the latest evidence-based strategies to help you move better, feel stronger, and stay injury-free. Let's learn together.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Higher Powered Podcast. I have a very special guest today. I am joined by Wendy Viviers. She is a sports medicine specialist in South Africa. She is a geriatric clinical specialist here in the United States, and she's currently working on her PhD in older athletes. She has worked for 25 years in her own practice and currently teaches in Doctor of Physical Therapy programs and travels all over teaching. She is involved with the Sustained Athlete Fitness Exam, which is where I met her. And I met her in the summer of 2023 when I volunteered to help at the National Senior Games in Pittsburgh. And I had no clue how impactful those 2 days were going to be. And it was because I got to meet Wendy. I learned so much in those 2 days about working with masters athletes that it really sparked a little bit of a passion for me and really shaped my practice in a way that I never expected. So I'm happy to talk with my favorite Queen's English-speaking South African, Wendy Viviers. And she's going to come on today here to talk about the masters athlete. She is the master of masters athletes, and help us learn about the aging process in athletes and how to combat that and sustain performance longer. So, Wendy, welcome on today.
Thank you so much. And just so that you always have this on record, you were in all of the times that I actually have come across students that are qualified and are now doing postgraduate education in South Africa and here, you were the most entertaining by far. You were a sponge. And that is something that is where I come from, an incredible, compliment. A sponge means that you have intellectual humility, and it was an absolute privilege. So really, I enjoyed those 2 days. And in fact, if I talk about anything about Pittsburgh, it was about the fact that Kurt was there and we dragged you around kicking and screaming and possibly changed your perceptions for life, because that's what it should be. It's a very different demographic.
Yes, thank you so much. It was probably even more impactful for me. So I'm thankful to have you on here, and I'm thankful that you're willing to give me a fraction of your time, because I know that it is very limited in your world. So let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your professional background and how it led you to where you are now.
Okay, so obviously I did qualify a long time ago. I worked only for about 3 years before I opened my own practice in South Africa. And that was because we generally don't have the big, healthcare systems that you do here, where people go into things like we have in North Carolina, which is Duke, or the UNC system. And it was something that I kind of graduated into. My background is treating very high-level younger athletes, and I started all the way from the bottom. I started essentially being a specialist in younger athletes. So I did growth phases. I did Osgood Schlatters treatments. I did all of that type of stuff for developing athletes. And then I kind of progressed, into to the national level athletes and some international level athletes. And then what happened is my patients started getting older, and they still wanted to stay active. They still wanted to stay competitive. And the big difference possibly between the US and South Africa is that we have a very, very energetic population. The majority of the population plays sport, some kind of competitive sport. We are the most competitive nation on earth, I think, besides maybe the New Zealanders and Australians. And they wanted to stay active. But I had absolutely no idea of how to do that. Because if you go to the literature, when you did that, when I was doing it, 20 years ago, 15 years ago even, there was nothing in it. You couldn't actually see anything on how to actually treat these athletes. So it was a serious baptism by fire for me. It started this kind of horrible feeling inside of me that, and you get it as a PT, and the good PTs always get it, where you feel like you just don't know anything. When people walk in and you actually don't know what to do with them. And I think one of the best things to have in those situations is just to say to people, listen, I don't know, but I'd love to learn with you. And if you can help me through this, I'm going to try a whole lot of things, and we're going to see if we can come up with a way to keep you going. And that's how it all started. It started with a lot of listening, a lot of reading, a lot of trial and error. That honestly was more than anything. And very luckily, I had people that had a huge sense of humor, and they allowed me to try things out on them. And it kind of progressed all the way to now, where I then went obviously and did a sports medicine master's and met a few people. But, you know, in South Africa, we have, where I actually studied, in fact, where I'm doing my PhD, is the University of Cape Town, which is highly rated. I think it's 200th in the world for university, which is, you know, a very good rating for a university from a small country in Africa. But what we have there is we have something called the Sports Science Institute. And the Sports Science Institute of South Africa is essentially a place where, you know, the best minds collaborate. And we get athletes from all over the world that come there. But the one thing that I pointed out when I got there was no older athletes. Everybody was so-called elite, which is a word that drives me nuts because elite doesn't have an age limit. And they couldn't answer my questions. So I just kept going to courses internationally, nationally, trying to get this stuff done. And then obviously 6 years ago, I moved to the US, arrived here and realized that nobody did it here either. So it was something that, you know, kind of grew out of an absolute necessity. And if you want to know who else is doing it, probably only the Australians. So you've got a group of guys coming out of Australia that have looked at the Sydney, World Masters Games and things like that, guys like Klimstein and Reburn. But very few people have actually described this population. And it's incredibly difficult to treat them because of that. So hopefully I can give you some clinical pearls and some practical advice, because that's basically what we have at the moment. We have a little bit of research, but not that much. So we're hoping to add to that, hopefully in the next few years, so we can get them going, because the population is aging, man, and we need to keep up.
I love that. One of my favorite things about getting to know you and working with you is you're right. No one else is doing it. So when I worked with you and I learned a lot of what we covered in those 2 days, I felt like it was unlocking a door to something that I haven't seen before, something that I wouldn't have access to otherwise. So let's start picking your brain a little bit. Tell me a little bit about the normal aging process in athletes. What are some typical patterns or muscle groups that are affected, and how do these perfect performance?
So it's a very interesting thing. So I think one of the things that we have to acknowledge in this country is that we have this tendency as PTs to want to run in one lane. Okay, so we have sports guys who are sports specialists and on the top of their game, and they really know everything there is to know about a body that is working correctly, which has good physiology, which isn't aging. And yes, some of them even specialize in kids as they are getting to the point where they have got this peak physiology. Unfortunately, the only other people that understand what aging athletes are going through are the geriatric specialists. But the geriatric specialists only start at 65. And they have this thing where, unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans that they are treating are people sitting in chairs. They are frail, and they are people that are generally not as active as we would like them to be. So we've got these two groups of people, which I actually had a look at the stats the other day, and I realized that we have, I think it was 1.3% of our entire PT population are sports specialists, and 1.9% are geriatric specialists. And that's out of 240,000 practicing PTs in this country. So we lose a lot of our patients to sports coaches, athletic trainers, that type of stuff. And we have the benefit, of course, is that we actually have the medical knowledge. Not that they don't, because I've met some unbelievably brilliant, colleagues out there in different professions. But we have the ability to understand that there is a physiological part that comes with this. So one of the biggest things to remember is that, where you say when you're treating, and this is a common one, don't treat a woman like a little man. They're totally different. But by the same token, don't treat an older athlete like a younger athlete, because there are certain things that you need to actually have in mind. So the biggest things to keep in mind is that, unfortunately, as we get older, the hormones start to go for a ball of chalk. Okay, now men are very lucky. Men, if they just train really hard and I'm talking about weight training, they can actually keep their testosterone pretty level right up until, I mean, we're showing now in the literature, probably until about the age of 85, they can keep it pretty stable. Okay, but that takes a lot of weight training. All right, but you can keep that going. Remember that unfortunately women go through what we call the menopause transition, where anything from the age of kind of 40 to 65, women are involved in this process where their body is essentially just becoming devoid of estrogen. And we know that testosterone and estrogen are the two hormones that are basically going to maintain muscle mass. In women, testosterone and estrogen maintain muscle mass. And interestingly enough, estrogen also plays a role in men, but obviously to a lesser extent. So when those things start to wane, we start to get very characteristic changes that come with aging. And those changes are things like we get anabolic resistance. And if you want to remember anything about an older athlete, you just have to think about anabolic resistance. Now, what anabolic resistance is essentially you are losing the ability, or the ability is declining, to be able to use an exercise stimulus on one hand, and the food that you put in your mouth, particularly protein, to be able to repair and build muscle. So what that means is that when you're 25, 35, you are able to essentially have this equal relationship between what you put in is what you get out. When you get older, that's not the case. Now what happens is you have to put in a lot more to be able to get out the same amount or even slightly less than what you did when you were younger. So we're talking about higher intensity, and we're talking about way better eating. We're talking about much better thought processes about sleep. You know, we just don't understand the importance of sleep. And there's a lot of research in in younger athletes about how important sleep actually is. But in older athletes, nothing. And we have to understand that sleep becomes critical when you get older. The other thing is we get certain things like we get a decreased thirst perception. So as you get older, and this starts already from about the age of 45, you just don't get as thirsty as you used to. So we find that we're not getting enough water. The system does not work without water. And really in athletes, it is a big problem. To get water down their throats, they just don't want to do it because they don't get thirsty until about 5 or 6 in the afternoon when they realize how dehydrated they are and their system just craves water, and then they just blow up like a balloon, and then by the next day they're feeling terrible. So we have to look at it as, what are the big things? So the big things is less response from muscle because of hormones, okay? Then we need to understand that our circadian rhythms change. We start to want to go to bed earlier and, wake up earlier. We sleep less. We don't sleep as deep. And then we have this thing where we just don't drink enough water. We just don't get enough protein. We don't look after ourselves like we should, because we actually haven't realized that we have to do something different. And that's the biggest issue when it comes to older athletes. They don't think they have to do anything different. They think they just have to keep doing the same thing that they did when they were younger, and they will keep their performance. And that is not true. So what that all does together is make a system that is incredibly inflamed. And inflammation is the worst thing that you can possibly have, because when you're trying to up your intensities, how do you up your intensity with a system that's now hyperreactive? So it's not a case of we give them a blank prescription and say, you're an athlete, you need to go out there, train as hard as you possibly can until you fall down. We have to understand that there needs to be some thought process as to what is enough. And unfortunately, that's trial and error. There's a lot of literature that will tell you how hard you can train a sprinter, for example, that's 20 years old. There's nothing to tell you how hard you can train a 75-year-old that's still sprinting out of the blocks. That is something that we need to work on. So it's very individualistic, and this is why I love older athletes, because it's never the same. You can never give a recipe treatment. You have to start with the basics. You have to start with saying, okay, well, in my experience, if you go and you do weight training 3 times a week, okay, and we start with 20 minutes and we start with something that's really, really hard, let's see how you recover. Only do it 2 days in a row maximum. Make sure that you at least have a rest day, never do 3 days in a row, and see how you go. That person may go out, train ridiculously because they're a high-level athlete and they think they can. And then we've got 3 weeks of recovery afterwards because now we have essentially torn something, or we have acute inflammation. So the things that you get ridiculous things. You'll go and give somebody a heavy weight to go and do lunges with, for example. Don't even worry about the knees. They get an acromioclavicular joint inflammation, because there's an increase in inflammation in their system. So we need to think about food that's anti-inflammatory. We need to think that rest is something that brings inflammation down. You know, there's a whole lot of things that we need to look at. We need to look at cortisol. So cortisol is obviously our stress hormone. And we find that in women, when they go through menopause, the cortisol levels go through the roof. And one of the biggest things that increases systemic inflammation is increased systemic cortisol. So scarily enough, if those women go and do huge amounts of endurance training, so think about that. I've always been a long distance runner. I'm the skinny thing. I start putting on weight because I'm going through menopause and I'm just going to run more. Endurance training, prolonged endurance training, is actually been shown to increase cortisol in women going through menopause. So we got to start having conversations with them, and we got to start going, we don't want you doing that anymore. We want you taking out 2 of those long sessions, and we want you replacing them with high intensity interval training. But we can go through all of those separately. The other thing is think about the glute. The glute max is everything, and you know it. You heard me talking about it. In fact, at the last CSM, I saw that Dr. Powers was there too, also talking about glute max. And it is something that you really need to consider. It's the biggest muscle in the body. So because as we get older, we start to lose muscle mass progressively, no matter what we're doing. We're losing it at about 1%, per year over the age, especially over 70. We're starting to lose a significant proportion. By the time by the time we get to 75, we've lost about 35% of our effective muscle mass. And that is a huge amount when it comes to performance, where seconds matter. Okay, so the glute is incredibly important. It keeps everything going. And we can look at that when we look at exercise. But those are the big things. Anabolic resistance, drink more water, make sure that you put in the protein, make sure that you're doing the high intensity, understand that inflammation is our biggest issue, and know that you're never, ever going to come up with a recipe. You have to say, let's try this. And if we fail, then we know we're not going to do that again. And then we just keep playing with where we put everything.
So much goodness in that answer. And 2 things stood out to me. One, you mentioned sprinters aged 75 or 80, whatever, coming out of the blocks. And I'm sure a certain number of people listening to this are thinking, oh my gosh, there are people still sprinting at that age. The answer is yes, absolutely. And the light really went on in my head when I witnessed this in Pittsburgh. I think the oldest athlete I worked with that weekend was like 96 or something. So there are still athletes competing throughout the lifespan, and it was so cool and so inspiring to see that. So I just want to bring a little bit of light to that. And the second thing is the importance of glute max, and you were the one who really changed my thinking around this muscle. And we might get into it a little bit here with glute med versus glute max. And I started looking at the body differently after working with you. And I also started literally looking at people differently, because we would stand there and you would point out an athlete who maybe had a flatter butt or less volume of glute max muscle. So I promise, if I'm out there on the streets looking at your butt, it's not because I'm interested in you. It's because I'm assessing your glute max.
Absolutely. So the big joke that I always, and Kurt will tell you this, the big joke that I always say, especially to men, is that if you don't look after that glute max, you're going to need 2 wallets to put them, into your back pockets to make it look as if you've got a glute. It is incredibly important. So that's something to remember. So if you think about the glute max does huge things. And let's go back to that sprinter coming out of the blocks, because the average 75-year-old, even the athlete, is struggling and probably doesn't come out of the blocks anymore, probably does a 3-point start. And he essentially is already getting to, the woman are already doing a standing start. Okay, so the reason for that is, think about glute max. Glute max is the thing that everybody understands extends the hip. Okay, it gets the leg back. That's the thing that gives us what we call a trailing limb angle. Just essentially, if you're looking at yourself from the side, is how far back can I get that leg from my trunk? The further that I can get that back, the more I'm going to get my foot in the correct position to be able to use the most energy conserving thing that we have, which is basically our whole Achilles and that whole muscle tendon unit that comes with it. That's the thing that gives us push off. But push off does not work unless you place the leg in the position for push off. So think about coming out of a block. If you watch Usain Bolt come out of the blocks, and there's some great YouTube videos that you can go and slow that down. He's sitting in a block and he's essentially taking a leg and extending it all the way back, okay, because he's got to be able to come out horizontally, okay, not vertically. The only thing that you can get out of the block with horizontally before you start going vertical is the extension, is the hip pushing against the actual plate. If you cannot do that, you're in trouble. So the reason that older athletes actually can't push out or get out of those blocks anymore is because they lack the ability to extend the hip. But it's not the only component. And this is where the rehab starts to become very important when you're looking, as a PT, when you're looking at this whole situation of how do I rehabilitate glute max? You don't go and do 2,000 leg extensions or anything stupid like that, or hamstring curls or whatever. No. What you're trying to understand is that the glute has much more functionality than that. So the biggest other thing that it does is if you're coming out of the blocks, if your trunk is rounded or dropped towards the ground, you're going nowhere. And the reason is because glute max also counters the weight of the trunk. So I need to be able to, and if you see Usain Bolt, he comes out straight. Okay, if you look at a 75-year-old, they come out rounded. And it's because they've lost the ability to hold the trunk and extend the leg off the trunk. Okay, so that's the other thing. And then when you mention glute med does not function without glute max. So you can do as many hip abductions, sideline clams, you can do whatever you like. Okay, what you are not going to be able to do is strengthen a glute med without a glute max. Because if you're standing up against gravity, the glute max is the single most important thing on the stance leg. So on the leg you're standing on, the glute max has to hold the trunk over the hip, and it has to hold the hip over the knee, over the foot. So if it doesn't hold it, glute med is in a total position of disadvantage. So watch for the patient that comes in, and Kurt will tell you this. They do a 5-time sit to stand with their legs wide apart. That is an indication of a weak glute med. As soon as you bring their legs in, they will stand up okay because they can use their quads to do that. But as they come down into the chair, they bounce. And the reason they bounce is because they've lost the eccentric lowering control to get back into that chair from glute max. So that's always a clinical pearl. Anybody that's running with their legs too wide, hips turned out, anybody that wants to naturally stand with their hips too wide apart, go and look at their glute max, not their glute med. Their glute med has done something to compensate for a glute max. It's put the body in a position where glute med is shortened so it can activate easier. But that is not the glute med's fault. That's the glute max's fault. So you want to get somebody out of a block? Get their glute med get their glute max going. And yes, you also train their glute med, but off a stable glute max and a stable trunk. So you'll see that all of the exercises that I advocate, all of them, are in weight bearing. There are very few things that you'll ever see me do on the ground, besides if I'm going to go and do a isolated side plank or something like that, if I've picked up an issue. But function is important. And that's the other thing to think about with athletes. They are, especially older athletes, they know better than us. They've been doing this for years, and they are a tough demographic to get through to. So you've got to make a good case. And that good case is, if I'm going to rehabilitate you to push out of the blocks, I better be doing something that looks like pushing out of the blocks. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Now tell that to an athlete, you've got them. Because they understand that those two things are together. It translates into getting out of the blocks faster. And once you've got that little common thread with them, you got them for life. Definitely.
I still remember you saying this in Pittsburgh. You said glute med is America's favorite muscle. And then you went on the rant that you just went on, and completely changed my thinking, because since then, when I have worked with older athletes, I've started to pick up on these things. I started to pick up on maybe their lack of glute max hypertrophy or the atrophy that has happened over time. I started to notice the legs coming apart a little bit more. And I think as new therapists, we're often taught like, oh, glute med controls the pelvis. Glute med does abduction. So when you see these things, or when people come in with pain or discomfort on the outside of their hips, oh, their glute med must be weak. And then you have them do side-lying abductions or standing abductions or hip hikes or whatever, and it doesn't really change a whole lot of their symptoms, and sometimes it even makes them worse because that's not the real issue. So you put a huge tool in my toolbox, and now glute max has become my favorite muscle in the entire body. There was a season, well, a pretty big season, but a definite season after I came back from Pittsburgh where almost everybody that came in to see me was getting the Running Man exercise, because like I had like 25-year-old like fit police officers, and they could do like 3 reps of the Running Man exercise. And so that was something that was really important for the way that I look at things. And then just again picking up on these little patterns that happen with older athletes. And I will say, when I was in Pittsburgh working with them, I felt this like huge wave of positive energy for my career, because they wanted to learn everything I could tell them that would help their performance or help them compete longer. So in some ways, in the traditional PT setting, like people will come to see you because their doctor came to see, or their doctor referred them, or, you know, because they have to be there, they're having a little bit issue with this and that. This group, the masters athletes, might be the most intense group in terms of wanting to learn more, wanting to better themselves, because they want to play as long as they physically can, and they're just seeking information on how to do that. So that was really, gave me a lot of energy going forward. So that was really awesome.
And you know, that's the thing. You've got to remember that nobody's telling them what they need to know. And I think that's what you learned in a big way, is that you almost think of, you know, these athletes as people that would understand how to eat well, would understand how to exercise. But what we've forgotten is that these are younger athletes in an older athlete's body with the same mindset that they had when they were younger. And nobody has told them how they need to adjust. So what we're not doing is we're not saying to them, we want you to, and this is a common thing. So if they go into a clinic and they say to the doctor, listen, I keep pulling my muscles, I keep pulling my tendons, I keep having pain. The natural thought process of the doctors in the US specifically is, well, let's roll them up in cotton wool and tell them that what they should do is they should decrease their intensity. And that is not right. So the first person that says to them, we understand that you're an athlete, we see you, we know that you need to train hard. But maybe what you need to do is you need to do the smarter things. You need to go and train the heck out of that glute max. If you do that, then everything starts to get a little bit easier. But you can't just hit it with a big stick. You need to do it hard, but you need to give it some rest in between. So that whole thought process of being sponges is because they're desperate for this information. And honestly, and I told you the same thing, if there was ever a niche in the market, it is older athletes. That exponentially, we have at the moment over 100,000 athletes that are just at the NSGA, so the National Senior Games. 100,000 athletes are competing at the state level, okay? And that's the winners at the state level. So can you imagine how many other people have taken up pickleball, have taken up running is a big one, you know, all of these types of things. And look, they are just craving information. They are desperate for somebody just to say to them, there's a better way to do this. No, you don't have to stop. And yes, we can keep your performance. So that was one of the biggest things that I brought to the Sustained Athlete Fitness exam, was just the mentality from South Africa and New Zealand and Australia, which is we don't need to do this differently so much as we need to do this better. We need to give you the tools to keep you exercising, because we know from experience, and that's where the 25 years of experience comes in my case. I know I can keep athletes playing. I know I can keep them at the top of their games. They're still winning in the world. The point is that I had to change my mindset completely, in that I had to see them not as people that needed to be wrapped up in cotton balls. Sometimes you've got to put your foot up their rear ends and drive them like that because they think they now deserve some rest. But they're a population that once they start to feel, first of all, like you have their best interest at heart, and secondly, like there's some progress, you will have a patient for life, even if they have to pay cash to come to see you, because they are getting what they need out of us as a doctoring profession. They came there not asking you to fix their Achilles tendonitis. They came there to tell you how to fix their Achilles tendonitis and go back to where they were 5 years ago when it came to speed or ability to get out of the blocks or the ability to jump if they're a setter. Whatever it is, we need to do it.
Okay. So then the question is, the $1 million question is, how do we do it? What are some exercises? You touched on this a little bit. What are some exercises that you go to? What kind of training considerations would you have for masters athletes versus younger athletes, specifically like tendon or joint health or incorporating plyometrics, that kind of stuff?
Okay, so let's kind of do it by system. So if we think of, let's just go back to cardiovascular. So if we're at the cardiovascular system, remember I used to say it in Pittsburgh, it's all about the highs and the lows. Okay, when you are a younger athlete, and let's talk about the endurance athlete, because you're going to see that person coming in, and they're somebody that we can lead on to with the kind of protein discussion. But you know that endurance athlete that's run thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers, they don't come in looking well built like a sprinter because that's not their body type. Okay, and they've decided that they only fuel on carbohydrates, and what they do is they put their shoes on no matter where they are, and they run until they get their second wind, and they just keep running. And they are putting in probably, you know, the average older athlete's probably putting in 10 to 12 hours of running a week. That is a lot of running. Okay, and remember what I said, that woman, that's going to increase your cortisol. And in men, it's actually going to decrease your testosterone. The body is using the testosterone to try as much as it can to maintain your metabolism when you are essentially putting it into this slow, steady state of basically using all of the minerals and vitamins and food and whatever you have in your system. So that person comes in and they look like a skinny stick. Okay. So now you have the conversation. Okay. You have to say to them, when it comes to cardiovascular exercise, and remember that you have to talk the language. So you're an endurance exercise person. What do you think you use for endurance? Everybody says your heart. Well, unfortunately, when you're older, you're not using your heart only. You're using your muscle because of the entire system. So remember that the capacity of your heart to get oxygen to your muscle is pure cardiovascular. Okay. But the ability of your muscle to use the oxygen that is delivered by your heart is vital when you get older. So as you lose muscle mass, you lose the capability to use the oxygen at the muscle level. And the reason that what happens is that we don't have, and you'll see that with older athletes, they say, I cannot get my heart rate as high as I used to. Well, if your muscle is only this small, and it used to be this big, your muscle is only asking for half of the amount of oxygen. So your heart is only going to pump to the capacity that it needs to pump to fulfill the requirements of the muscle. So now what you've got to do is you've got to build the muscle to build the cardiovascular reserve. We want the muscle to be asking more of the heart, and then the heart will very much less rapidly decline in its ability to push that maximum heart rate. And then we keep feeding that cycle. So you've got to change their mindsets. Yes, you will go into a gym, and no, you won't look like Arnold Schwarzenegger when you do because of anabolic resistance. You're not going to build that bulk anymore. But what you're going to do is you're going to build effective muscle that's asking harder questions of the heart. So how do we do that? We want to be able to say to athletes, and look, we do know as you get older, even in athletes, you can't dodge high cholesterol. Lots and lots of athletes have high cholesterol, much less than the average, the average population, but they've got high cholesterol, so they're taking statins. They have blood pressure issues. Many of them have high blood pressure. So we can't dodge those types of things. But what we have to make them understand is that the heart health as you get older is about the ability to push that heart rate up, but then just as quickly to recover back down again, to push it up and to come back down. So if you have a person that's not used to doing interval training, where we started at Pittsburgh, and you can remember that, is we would say to them, I want you to go out into the street, and I want you to look for the next mailbox. And I want you to haul butt to that next mailbox as fast as you possibly can, whether that's walking, jogging, or running. We want you getting to that mailbox that you are sucking gas. And then what you do is you walk to the next mailbox to recover. And if it takes you more than that next mailbox, well, you're noting that, because you're going to know that if it took you 1.5 mailboxes to recover, as you're getting better at this, so it should take you just to that mailbox and even shorter. So that's giving them the ability to understand that it's really high intensity that counts, but that rapid recovery is even more important, because at the muscle level, you are stimulating the process that utilizes oxygen for the ATP circuit. And the more effective that high, low is, the better you're going to be at using what your heart can get to your muscle. So big things. We want them training only, and this is the piece that people don't like. 20 minutes is the maximum you are allowed to do for either high intensity interval training, and we want them eventually getting to sit. Sit is where you're going to go until you vomit, okay? High intensity is where you're going to 85% of your heart rate max, whereas your sit is where you are going to 100% plus of your heart rate max. We want them working at that all-out effort. Are we going to put the person that is uncontrolled with AFib onto sit training? No. That's where a doctoring profession comes in. You make sure you choose your patients correctly. But everybody else should be building up to doing that. So how do we start? We say to them, okay, how about, and everybody pronounces this differently, but Tabatas. You know Tabatas?
Yeah.
Okay. So if I had to think of a Tabata, I would go and do totally unloaded, no weights. And you could go and do jumping jacks for 20 seconds. And then just stand for 10 seconds. And then do squat jumps, little ones, and only squat down, 45 degrees, if that's as far as you can go. You do that for 20 seconds, 10 seconds off. And you find those exercises that you can basically stack together for 8 different exercises, 20 seconds on at that either 85% if you're doing HIIT or 100% plus if you're doing sit, and you do that for 8 reps. You then get to the end of that. Now, this is where it comes in, where you have to be careful. You want a full minute rest between those sets for older athletes. When you're first starting, some people require 2 minutes. They have to go to the point where they feel like they can do it again, okay? And you want to get them to the point where they can build up to doing 4 sets of those 8 different exercises, 20 second on, 10 second off. And then they walk away. That's it. That's their cardiovascular session done. But what you're building them up to is something like a kettlebell swing. So you get a kettlebell swing, you got a 20-pound kettlebell, and you go full out on a kettlebell with really, really good form. Now you're doing a full body sit or hit, okay? And then you rest. And then maybe what you're doing is you're going and you've got, 2 weights in your hand, and as you squat down, you're pushing up with weights. What you're doing there is that you're training your heart. You're also training your muscle capacity. So go and look on the internet. Go and look for the young athletes or the older athletes that are very strong, very fit, that have got YouTube channels. And go and look what they are doing for their Tabatas. They're doing at least 1 session a week completely unloaded, which is what I just said, like jumping jacks or squats and jumps. And then what they're doing is they're coming in and they're putting a little bit of weight into it. A little bit of weight, because you don't need a lot of weight. And that changes the game. It changes the game when it comes to your capacity. Now, if you can get them doing that for 6 weeks, 2 sessions a week, and then as soon as they can, 3 sessions a week maximum of 20 minutes, never ever 2 days in a row, it's too much, okay? They will start to run better, and they will love you forever. Because it's a foregone conclusion. What you're doing is that you are making your muscle more efficient. And if you make your muscle more efficient, you're making your heart more efficient at delivering oxygen to it. And obviously, if the heart's getting stronger, your endurance capacity is getting stronger. So it's a totally different way of thinking about it. Okay, that's cardiovascular. All right. When you think about muscle training now, there is nothing more important for an older athlete than heavy weight. And when I say heavy weight, I mean right at the maximum. Okay, so the maximum when you start might be 5 pounds. It doesn't matter. What you need to do is you need to work out, first of all, and this is the piece that drives me nuts. We need a way of assessing so that we know what that person's capacity is. Because unless we are training them at that capacity, or slightly below it if we're going at 85%, or if we had, if we're doing hard, we're at 100% if we have to be, we're not changing anything. This is so important in older athletes. When you're younger, you can go and watch TV with your phone in one hand and a 2-pound weight in the other hand, and you can do that until you're tired, and you will be able to build muscle mass. You can't do that when you're older. You got to hit it hard because the Grim Reaper's coming, and you got to go faster than him, okay? And you got to hit it so hard that you are forcing the system to change. So what are you going to go and do? You are never going to go and train the same muscle group 2 days in a row. You're going to train the same muscle group in that one session in many different ways. So how would we test it? Let me give you an example. So I got somebody and I go, okay, you want to get out of the blocks. Now remember that simple sit to stand? 5 times sit to stand is the most unbelievably universal assessment, diagnostic, and rehabilitation tool. Because what it gives you as a PT is something that you've got in your box. I don't care if you don't know how to treat older athletes. You know how to assess somebody. So you put them into a chair and you say, all right, let's go. I want you sitting on the edge of your chair. Don't do it like we do normal strained protocol and sit all the way back. We want to make it really hard for them. We want them at the edge of their chair and we want them going all the way up, all the way down as fast as they can. We time them. Okay, and we go, oh, that's great. Now they think they're geniuses. So what we do then is we put a weight vest on them. And we have a look at what the time is with the weight vest on. So if we put a weight vest on that's 20 pounds, and we go from doing it in 5 seconds to doing it in 6 seconds, that's the weight we can start at. Okay, because we've literally decreased their time quite significantly just with that weight. But we need to make sure that they understand that as soon as it gets too easy, so they can put that weight vest on, and even if we just sent them home with every time you go to the bathroom or every time you think of, I don't know, whatever, every hour, I want you to do 5 sets of 5 repetitions with this weight vest on. And at the end of the week, I want you to retest your own time. Take your own time. And if that time is now 5.5 minutes, keep doing it. Just make sure you're going faster. At the point where you get back to 5 seconds again, what are you going to do? You're going to increase the weight. And how much do we increase the weight for? 10%. Okay, is the maximum you can go. Some people, because of inflammation, can only go 5%, but we put 10% on them. And then we get them to time again, and we teach these athletes how to self-monitor. The thing we don't do as PTs is we just don't understand where that person's limit is, and because you're not going to get a lot of healthcare dollars, insurance is not going to pay for somebody who's healthy and fit and just wants to come to get better for performance. Give them the biggest gift you can and teach them how to self-monitor. Because just teaching them that, they know that if they're in the gym and they're doing a leg press and they can do 8 leg presses and it's really hard, man, at the end of it, they're telling you they're 10 out of 10 exertion. And they are doing that at 70 pounds. When they get to the point where it's 5 out of 10 at 70 pounds, do we tell them to keep doing that for the rest of their life? No, that's for girls. Then we increase by 10% and we let them keep going. And people say to me, well, how long do you let them do this for? Until they drop off their perch and we bury them. There is no such thing as muscle maintenance without pushing to the envelope. So think about that. That's really important. When you've got a younger athlete, they can do nothing for 3 months and be within 5% of the muscle mass of where they were after not doing anything. If you take an older athlete and you leave them for 3 months with no muscle training, they will have lost 30% of their functional capacity and probably a good 10% of their muscle mass. Have to do it.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that. Okay.
Okay. And then the last one to think about, obviously, I mean, there's a whole lot of different aspects, but plyometrics are hugely important. How do you expect to maintain jumping, speed, agility, the ability to move around the court, the ability to get to the ball, if you don't maintain rate of force development? It doesn't matter if you've got the biggest, strongest muscles, unless you have put on a good base, and we usually say at least a good 3-month base of normal weight training, 8 to 12 reps, kind of pushing at 85%. You have to then get them into some power training. Okay. And the power training, you got to bring that weight all the way down. You know how power training goes, but in athletes, I would say, older athletes, I'd say you've got to come at least down to 50% of what their kind of 1 rep max is. So if you had the guy coming out of the chair with a 20-pound weight, if you want him to jump out of the chair, if he's got a 20-pound vest on, you want him jumping out of the chair only with 10 pounds on. And in fact, you're going to start him with nothing just to watch his form, because unfortunately, one of the biggest things that they have injured are their Achilles tendons. They do get a lot of tendinitises and tendinoses. Mm-hmm. So start little and then put the weight on and then gradually build up. And then look at something that is sport specific. If they need to come out of the blocks, yes, it is important to be able to stand on the spot and do single leg jumps. It is important to do jump for distance, but you train them in a way that is progressive. And you understand that plyometrics is for any older adult, always part of the program. Always. It has been shown to be safe even in the frailest people if you put a base of good strength on it, and then you build into the rest of the stuff that goes with it. Okay, that's what we got trained to do. I don't need to tell you how to progress. You need to just make sure that you're always, as soon as it gets that tiny bit too easy, you push. And then obviously the last thing you got to think about, they need to stretch. I don't care if they thought they were flexible when they were younger and they've never had to stretch. Every single athlete that is over 50 needs to stretch. And that stretching should be done when they are not doing cardiovascular, plyometric, etc., certainly not on the same day as performance. We know that anything that's an explosive sport, if you stretch static stretching, you're done. We need to teach them how to do a proper warm-up that involves dynamic stretching with sport-specific joint preparation. And it should be a maximum of 10 minutes. They're welcome to stretch afterwards, but not if they're going to perform again on the same day. And they need to know how flexible they are so that they can maintain that range. Because if you got your leg all the way back, but your ankle dorsiflexion is limited, you're not pushing off the floor. I don't care how much we've rehabilitated the rest of the chain. If there's lack of dorsiflexion on one side, you've already decreased your time incrementally, just because we didn't take care of a really fundamental thing, which is joint range of motion that is the same both sides. So that's a no-brainer.
All right. I want to be mindful of your time here, but there's one last topic I wanted to hit on, and you did touch on this a little bit, and that's nutrition, focusing on protein in this age group. Can you tell me, I know that some of the common responses we get are, well, I just don't have the appetite that I used to. How am I supposed to get all this extra protein? And having like extra portions of protein can become a little bit daunting because it's just heavy. It's heavy food. Yeah, tell me a little bit about your muscle medicine mindset and how this population can get some extra protein.
Okay, so just simple things to think about, just the basics first. So if you think about and this is for athletes, so anybody above 50, we are talking about, if you are a pure endurance athlete, you need at least 1.8 grams per kilogram per day of good quality protein. Okay, now think about this now. If you are a purely strength or resistance athlete, so you are a Olympic weightlifter, you're somebody who does shot put, that type of stuff, you only need 1.6 grams per kilogram per day. And everybody goes, well, how come do you need more for endurance than you do for building muscle? If you say that protein is the building block of muscle, why do you need more for endurance? You need more for endurance because, like I told you, those guys are trying to fuel a system that is eating itself to sustain itself. Whereas the guy that does resistance training, he is doing something for his muscle that is improving his muscle's ability to use protein. So anabolic resistance, we know, is effectively targeted by resistance training. So if you do resistance training, your body is able to use more of the protein that you put into your system. So I don't have to smash too much into the system. The body will then be able to use it. Okay. However, if you are doing high intensity mixed, so the sprinter, the person who is playing 7 or 8 high-level volleyball games, beach volleyball games during the week, plus training in between, those types of people are going to need between 1.8 and 2.4 grams per kilogram per day. Now, everybody goes, well, that sounds easy enough. Now, remember what your doctor is telling you to do. Your doctor is telling you that older adults essentially can get away with 1.2, 1.0 grams per kilogram per day. Remember that those were always built on sedentary older adults who don't move, and essentially we just want them to be able to get out of a chair. The more you do, the more you got to feed the body because the muscle needs to recover. So you have to up the protein. That's the first thing. The second thing is what I said about good quality protein. Good quality protein is something that you have to be very careful with. Not everybody can afford good quality protein, but then you've got to get clever. So something like peanut butter that is not full of sugar. Please, we don't want too much sugar because remember that inflammation comes from too much sugar. When you have low hormones, you have an inability to actually regulate your metabolism and your glucose control and your glucose tolerance, etc., etc. So we don't want too much sugar. So we can go and eat peanut butter. But when I'm talking about eating peanut butter, I'm talking about eating 3 massively heaped tablespoons of peanut butter. My athletes keep jars on the counter with a spoon in it. And when they go past, they just eat it. Okay. You're going to eat more protein than you have ever thought possible in your life if you are doing this correctly. So the first thing you do is you take your body weight and you go and you say, if I'm going to be the strength guy, 1.6 times by grams per kilogram per day. And I'll work out what that is. On a 65 kilogram person, that's about 103 grams per day. 5 eggs is only 30 grams. 5 large eggs is 30 grams. Now, nobody's going to go and eat 5 large eggs, but if that's only 30 grams, that gives you an indication how much we need. Okay. Then what you need to do is you need to eat it spread throughout the day. So nobody is going to be able to get their protein if they eat it in one meal because we have a huge issue with protein satiation. We can only tolerate about 30 grams of protein. So if you only eat protein once a day, that's the maximum you're going to be able to eat. So you need to divide your 103 grams into 4 equal portions and eat it throughout the day. So that's Greek yogurt with your cereal in the morning. That is, and an egg, okay? That is a whole tin of tuna for lunch. And then you've got to start thinking about the best thing that we can possibly do, and this is a big one that I'll leave you with. Protein taken at night in a highly digestible form within 2 hours of going to bed has been shown to be incredibly efficient in older adults for repairing muscle overnight. So if you can get a whey protein shake. Now, why do I say whey? Everybody's going to go, well, what about casein? Well, if you take milk and you denature it, you get whey on one side, you get casein on the other side. Casein is the one with all the bad stuff. That's where all the fat is. That's where all the sugar is. You want whey protein. People that are lactose intolerant can take whey protein. Why? Because whey protein is denatured. The bonds are broken. You do not have lactose intolerance. You can take that. Why is it better than pea or whatever other protein you want to use? Because of lysine or leucine. Leucine is the most important building block that you have for muscle, and it is a protein component, and the highest by far is in animal proteins, unfortunately. So you would have to have twice as much pea protein, and that's going to get more satiation. So you go and have a protein shake 1 to 2 hours before bed, and you have taken your 4th protein of the day. And then remember that for women going through that transition, they put on weight because of the fact that the body turns a switch on. And that switch is called the I need protein switch, okay? And you will eat until you have satiated the protein that the body requires because it's losing it so rapidly. So the better quality protein you eat, the less food you will eat. If you're eating low quality protein, you're going to eat until you are ginormous. And it's as simple as that. Good quality, spread throughout the day. Make sure that you understand that you cannot eat more than about 30 to 40 grams at a meal. And make sure that you understand that this is a lifelong enterprise now. And the one only last thing you have to remember with protein, you have to drink water. Because protein will clog up that kidney if you do not have water. So make sure that you're drinking water. How much water is enough? We don't drink to thirst anymore because we don't have thirst perception. So you need to be getting, and if you look at this bottle over here, so these bigger bottles, you need at least 2 of these a day, in addition to all of the other fluid that you get in your normal meal or your normal diet. That was a lot, sorry.
No, that was awesome. That's exactly what I wanted. Wendy, how do masters athletes or older aging athletes, how do they find providers that are going to be able to help them?
You know what? That's a difficult one. I haven't worked that out myself. I think, the reason I go and I lecture all over the country is that because what I leave behind is geniuses like you that are going to take it to the next level. You got to go and you got to look. And honestly, I would say the internet is probably the best thing because you'll probably post this on the internet and people will learn about you through stuff like this. Go and look at the content creators that are looking at clever stuff. Don't go and look at the people that are looking at fad diets or mix this and you're suddenly going to lose your menopause weight, whatever. There is definitely no magic cure here. It's high intensity, harder than you've ever worked, eating more than you've ever eaten, sleeping better than you've ever slept. This is a full-time job. If you've got somebody that's telling you it's hard but giving you hope, those are the people that you follow. And you got to just go out there and try people. So do you go and try a sports person's first? Probably. Because they're probably going to be able to understand how to train you. But then you got to be the person that says to them, listen, I know that you putting me in cotton balls is not the right way to do it. Like my patients said to me, they were like, you know what, this is not acceptable. You're our PT. Learn how to do this better. So we got to start holding the people that we go to if we like them and we've got a good relationship with them. We got to hold them to a higher level. And the one thing you do to get to a PT is if you say to them, listen, you clearly don't know how to do this. I'm not going to go to another PT. I'm going to go to an athletic trainer because it looks like they will probably be able to help me more. Nothing is going to get your PT to go and crack a book more than that. Okay. And that is not anything to say about athletic trainers. I love them. But PTs, we are quite proud and that will get us going. So is there a registry of them? Unfortunately not.
Well, thankfully for me, I'm both a PT and an athletic trainer. You want to leave me, go to the athletic trainer, you're coming right back to me.
But the difference is that you're not going to have that. But there will be a lot of people that think that they are not up to treating older athletes. And in fact, that's what I'm doing for my PhD. I'm essentially working out a way of, I'm developing a tool to be able to assess for performance, to assess a whole lot of different things, but tools that we use every day in the practice. So what is the 5 times sit to stand time that if you're below this threshold means that you are in higher likelihood of being a poor performer? Because we have a huge amount of tools in our box, but what we need to do is we need to give every PT the ability to assess older athletes and then use what they intuitively have. Every PT knows how to push people to their limit. They just need to understand that older athletes have got a different limit, which is much higher to the average person that they see. And then they can treat anybody.
Wendy, thank you so much for coming on today. I don't know if you noticed, but I was like smiling through that whole session because it lights me up. Your education and your mindset just lights me up. And, I know I only check in with you a couple times a year here and there. That's mainly because I know how busy you are. But I just want you to know you are an invaluable resource to me. I hold you in the highest regards of respect in our profession. And I'm just so thankful that I got to meet you in Pittsburgh. And I'm so thankful that you still make time for me. So thank you so much for coming on.
Always will, because you are a legend yourself. Okay. And it's always a pleasure. So as long as we can both be spreading the love, we're going to have a whole lot more people that are going to be able to compete until they drop off their perch. And that's what we want.
All right. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Higher Powered Podcast. Thanks you again to Wendy for coming on and making time for us. If you want to connect or want to follow up something resonated with you today, find me on Instagram at Higher Power Sports PT, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Higher Powered Podcast, presented by Higher Powered Sports PT. We hope you gained valuable insights on how to stay strong, move better, and prevent injury, all backed by expert knowledge in sports physical therapy and athletic training. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Your support helps us bring more evidence-based tips and strategies to active individuals just like you. For more resources or to connect with us, head over to hpsportspt.com. That's hpsportspt.com. Remember, you've got the power to perform at your best. Keep training smarter, recovering faster, and living stronger. Just a reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It should not be considered medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your health or treatment plan. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to see you next time on the Higher Powered Podcast.